Alright everyone, so I've seen a few of these before, but I kind of wanted to get on the action myself and give a shot at a tier list specifically for Series 3 cards. If you look, most people are not Series 3 complete, but they are approaching, and there's that little last bit of like, do I spend tokens on this, do I not, etc, etc. So I figured, let's just kind of go over all the cards, and plus, Series 3 being the biggest pool, we'll probably do a Series 4/5 video soon. But for now, let's see where the Series 3 cards rank amongst the entire Marvel Snap pool. And one thing I want to say is the criteria of my ranking and the way I'm looking at it. First and foremost, is the card powerful on its own? Is it something that can stand on its own, can be really good, and not need to be built around completely? Is the card something that thrives in the correct environment, whether it's the meta or a certain playstyle or whatever is happening, or thrives in a very particular kind of deck or style like that? So those are the main things I'm looking at. Can it perform on its own? Does it need a bunch of friends, but is it really good when it has friends? Does it matter what the meta is? So this is based on the current meta as it stands in late February 2023. So Absorbing Man, I'm gonna say A tier. Very good card, just really good. On reveals are one of the most predominantly, or are the most predominant abilities in the game. They take up the most space of card design. It's like, I believe like 70% of cards in the game are on reveal. And Absorbing Man being able to copy them, it can function in things like Wong, especially now that it got updated to where it does work with Wong and gets the double triggers, that kind of thing. Absorbing Man is a really good card, and as we get more on reveal cards in the game, he just gets better. I don't really think he could be S tier because he is a product of, the deck around him a little bit, but, when you put him in an on reveal deck, very good. Adam Warlock, C tier. I don't think he's one of the worst cards in the game. He's not very good. I know that he was designed in a way for balance to have 0 power, but like flavor-wise, Adam Warlock is a very powerful figure, and it's a little weird that he draws cards and has no power himself. It's just a weird card. Yeah, there's Mr. Negative decks, but I don't think he's very good in those decks, to be honest. So yeah, C tier, it really needs a bunch of friends around him. Honestly, unironically, the best deck Adam Warlock goes in is a Guardians of the Galaxy deck. That on reveal, pick out where your opponents are playing. Adam Warlock is one of those telegraph things of like, hey, I'm going to play here, so a lot of times opponents will try to contest that lane so you don't draw cards. And the Guardians of the Galaxy cards pair well with him. But when your best deck is a deck that's not very good, it doesn't bode well for you as a card overall. But maybe you'll get buffed at some point. I don't know what you do with them. It's a weird slippery slope. Card draw is weird in Snap, so yeah. Arrow, S tier, best card in the game. Needs a nerf, needs a change, needs something to happen with it. It is incredibly obnoxious. The power isn't even what makes it good. It could be a 5-0 for all I care. It's the fact that it pulls everything. And it is insane of a card, and also the fact that it's random. If you look at my previous video about the arrow problem, the randomness does play a huge part in the frustration of this card. It is great against decks that want to drop a single card on the last turn to try and contest the lane that way. It is great against decks that want to play a plethora of cards on the last turn to try and win that way. As long as you are ahead after turn 5, Arrow is a pretty much guaranteed win, especially in combination with some other cards in this tier list. S tier, best card in the game, not even close. Agatha, D tier, it's a meme. Really funny. Really fun deck, too, with like Wave, Lady Sif, Ghost Rider, that kind of thing. But Agatha herself, not good, not going to be competitive. Unless they overhaul the way the AI works and gives them some intelligence, because right now the way Agatha works, Ego, those type of things where the AI plays for you, or even bots for that matter, they play 100% randomly. There is no rhyme or reason what they do. They just pick a card in hand that's able to be played. They play it in a random location, and they don't even consider anything else. If the AI was improved in Marvel Snap, or at the very least it had the bare minimum game knowledge of I don't want to play, a Carnage on my Hela that I just played, or not Hela. That's a bad example, but big card, whatever. Plenty of times, Agatha and Ego really mess up your plays, and even if they did that, I doubt she'd even go to C tier at that point. But yeah, Agent Coulson, B tier. I think really good, really solid card. I love it in Devil Dino. I think that's where its home is. I did make a meme Shield Agents deck, which I thought was kind of funny, but it's just for the randomness, like Agent 13, Maria Coulson, etc., etc. But Agent Coulson is the best of the Shield cards. He goes great in Devil Dino. There's not really many other homes for him, but I really like him as a card. Artem Zola. Artem Zola is probably A. It's a very powerful effect, but it does have the same problem of like Absorber Man, where he is a product of the deck he plays in. So like a Shuri, Shuri Zero deck will want to play him. A Wong style deck with Black Panther. So you want to be able to like get a 30 power Red Skull on his own in a lane, then Artem Zola on 6, and then just spread the board that way is really powerful. But it does have its counters. Obviously, you need to have it singular in that lane by itself to be able to work, so you don't do the 50-50 kind of thing, or even worse odds. But I still think it's a very good card. Of course, there's Cosmo armor, things like that too. But Artem Zola is very good, rightfully there. Baron, oh man, I think he's honestly, and we'll actually adjust the placings as we go. Baron, I think, is very much the bottom of C tier. I don't think it's D tier. I think anyone that says Baron's a really bad card is a little bit wrong in that sense. I don't think it's very good. Let's get that clear. But Mordo is not the worst card in the game, not even close. I think he's better than Agatha. You can play it in like a Ronin deck, which that of itself is not an extremely good deck by any means. You can play it in like Cerebro 3, being a 2-3 for that, and making them draw a card, giving them some disruption, honestly can be, on average an Iceman type of effect, like hitting like a 5 cost or whatever. At worst, just hitting another 6 drop they have, and like they just drew a card. But the odds of that aren't super high. I think he's very much the very bottom of C tier. Beast, B for Beast. Probably towards the bottom of B tier. Good card, has a cool deck. Like the bounce decks are really cool. They have a lot of playability to them. There's a lot of like thinking involved in what they do, and probably pretty much at the bottom of B tier. Solid card, nice reduction on the cost, but not a super competitive deck. It might be top of C tier, but then I look at his competition there with Adam Warlock and Baron. I think it's making me think Adam Warlock should be in D tier as I consider this. We'll get back to that. Black Bolt, with the release of Stature, I almost want to put him in C tier, but he's still D tier. I think better than Agatha, probably the best of the D tier, if I'm being honest. But Black Bolt needs some love, needs some kind of change. If you listen to the recent episode of Snap on Ego with Chris Bootman, we did kind of talk about Black Bolt a little bit, and I would like to see him change in some way. He just doesn't see a lot of play, even with Stature, I don't think, and especially with Stature just coming out and not being widely available to players to mess around with and test this. I still don't think that's very good, to be honest, but he's fine. I mean, as fine as he can be in D tier, right? Black Cat, I'll also say D tier. Yeah, let's say D tier. She only has really one home. It's going to be a Hela deck, because that's really the only deck that plays Ghost Rider. And even then, she's not always a shoo-in for those slots. I like her in Hela, but I really don't like Hela as a whole. She doesn't really have any opportunity to be played anywhere else, even as a 3/7. It's just, if you have her on turns 1 and 2, it's you're done. It's like you just lose her. And then that makes you inclined to throw in a random Ghost Rider package with her in a deck, and I can't imagine that that's going to be super great in comparison to other cards you'd be making that package with. Black Widow B tier. I love Black Widow. I think she's very solid. I think she's one of the most underappreciated cards in the game. Great disruption. Goes great with like Darkhawk decks and things like that, which are still very viable. I think she is a very good card and is just above average. Like she is B tier, good card. I don't think she's like worth like dropping 1,000 tokens on her. I think you'd rather just kind of acquire her naturally through the shop, or not the shop, but the wheel. But I like her. I like her a lot. I think she's underrated. Brood has really lost some of his luster since. So like before the server nerf, I'd say he's an A tier. I think now he's towards the top of B tier. Still good in Patriot, things like that. Making 2 other bodies for 3, so it's 6 power for 3 is pretty good on rate. Then you can add in the idea of Patriot buffing him, and even still Surfer to an extent, being a 3/2 now that buffs 2 isn't the worst thing in the world for Brood, but the overall hit to Surfer and the only really good deck it can be in otherwise, being Patriot, did hurt its stock a little bit. But Captain Marvel, I want to put her in A tier. I really like Captain Marvel. She has some weird interactions in the way that she works towards like the timing of the game. It feels like she should be the last thing possible. Like she doesn't go before Mysterio. But flavor-wise, I kind of get why Mysterio was the last thing, because he's the big trickster. So I think better than... Is she better than Brood? Yeah, I would say she's better than Brood just because she has more decks she can go in. She doesn't feel like she has to be tied to a deck. She is best in control decks, things that lock down lanes like Storm and stuff like that is where I feel she thrives the most. But you can throw her in other decks kind of just because you need a slot, you're missing other cards or whatever. And I think she fills that kind of position better than a Brood does. So I'd say top of B for now. Cerebro, straight up B. Probably middle of the pack B. Cerebro decks are really fun to play, but when you don't draw your namesake card being Cerebro, it's not very good. And Cerebro decks in themselves are very much prone to disruption. Scorpion, different zones and locations that reduce or even add power. Things like Monster Island to change the to give you a big card like that can really mess it up. So there's a lot going against Cerebro, and of course they have some tools to counteract that, like Luke Cage, Bast. Really, those 2 options for the most part. And then like Rhino and Scarlet Witch to change locations. But then I'm looking pretty much specifically at Cerebro 3, where Storm is the only option in Cerebro 2, so it's a little tough to say which of those is better. I think 3 is probably the better one because you have Valkyrie and things like that too, to at least alter like something like a monster from Monster Island. But Cerebro itself, the card's fine. It's good in the decks. It's the namesake of the decks for a reason, but it's nothing incredible. I don't think it's A tier. Certainly not S tier. But it's not anywhere near bad. It's just fine. Colleen Wing. Yeah, it's the rate's really good, but she only goes in one deck. So I'd say just under Captain Marvel, B tier. 2/4 is great, really good rate. Great enabler for Swarm, things like that. And even now, Wolverine, if you were so inclined to play him in your discard decks, she's a very good card for those, but she's only good in those discard decks, so that's why I think you got to put her in B tier. Crossbones. I do not like Crossbones. But do I not like him? I think I can't... I think he's better than Adam Warlock. He's better than Baron. So I think he's top of C tier for now. I just really don't care for the card very much. You have to be winning the lane. It's a very good rate, 4/8, but that clause of needing to win the lane is a little goofy to me. brings it down, and then at that point you're better off playing something like Jessica Jones even. But, you know, he theoretically can play in a lot of decks on his own and doesn't need a home, so I guess that's why I would put him a bit higher. Right? You could argue that Black Bolt kind of can. And Adam Warlock... Actually, I'm putting Adam Warlock below Baron at this point. And they can kind of independently be thrown into random decks, but I don't think they're as good as Crossbones. But I also don't think Crossbones is very good regardless. Crystal, worst card in the game right now. And I don't think it's particularly close. She needs a rework. Needs something. Needs a change. Honestly, I think the Inhumans in general, pretty much all the Inhumans need reworks. I don't think they're good. Just especially the ones that say middle lane. You gotta change those. Don't care for them. And I think Crystal's really bad. The draw 3 is not good. Shuffling back cards. It's also too late. I don't know what you could do. I don't think there's any small adjustments you can make in terms of her power and stuff like that to make her good. So yeah, very bad card. Dagger, bottom of... Well... She just got buffed to a 2/2. But I'm going to put her in D tier. I think move decks are very bad at the moment. But I think move decks on in their of themselves are better than Black Bolt. So top of D tier. So yeah, Dagger is a 2/2 now and can, like, you know, get +2 for each card moved there, or each enemy card when she's moved there. Sorry. But move decks in general are not very good. Yes, Molt did just release a video where he said he went to Infinite with a move deck. I'm pretty sure featured Dagger. But that doesn't mean that's a good deck. Molt's a good player. He's a great streamer. But move is some pieces away from being competitive. Daredevil is an S tier card. I will not hear otherwise. Daredevil is insane. And I was also going to pair very well with Kang when that releases. To have a plethora of information available to you on turns 5 and 6. That's insane. Going Daredevil and then like Professor X to lock down a lane on turn 5, be like, yeah, I win this one. And then Kang on turn 6 to see what your opponent's going to try and do, and then play around that. That's going to be a very good control deck. And unfortunately, Arrow's probably going to be in that deck if she's not nerfed anytime soon. Daredevil is an incredibly powerful card. There's no other card like it. It is an S tier card. Now, of course, on its own, it's just a 2/2. But it can't be countered. It can't be Enchantress. It can't, like, it's not an auto reveal, so you can't Cosmo it. The only way you can really counter it is if, like, you blow up either Daredevil himself, which there's really no card that does that unless he's buffed incredibly like an Ironheart, and then on top of that he's on the location that gives +5 power to all cards there, and then you can Shang-Chi it, I guess. But otherwise, like, you can't really mess with him, so he's very unique in that regard, gives a lot of information, and pairs very well with cards that you want to play with him, like Professor X, even Gamora, Spider-Woman even now could be okay for those decks, depending on the locations, I suppose. And yeah, great card, S tier. Not as good as Arrow. Honestly, Arrow is S+. In a role on her own. She's there. I don't think anything else is even close to her. So yeah, I think that's appropriate. Deadpool is a B card. Middle of B, probably between Cerebro and Agent Coulson. Above Cerebro. Deadpool's awesome. Really fun card. Great card. But you need to build around him. You need to destroy, and can unfortunately run into some issues with, like, counterplay and just the way the deck functions in general, not drawing Deadpool and stuff like that. Obviously, the backup plans to the deck can be very functional and good, but Deadpool is like a card you kind of want to build all in on. So if you kind of go halvesies on him, you're kind of hoping he works out, which I think is the better way to play around him. But if you do build all around him and you don't draw him, it's a really big feels bad. Death, on the other hand, is an S tier card. Better than Deadpool. Or, I'm sorry, Daredevil. And, of course, Deadpool. Death's insane. Insane card. One of the best in the game. Very good. So often is a zero-cost card, thanks to Wave, which we'll talk about in a minute. But, yeah. I don't really have much to say about Death. She's insane, especially with her friend above her in her own little world, Arrow. All right, Debris. I'm having a lot of B tier. I think Debris is top of B tier. Think it's better than Captain Marvel. Yeah, I like the disruption a lot. I do think you need to be smart with Debris, and there's a little bit more playing around Debris as the player of her. And you really need to be smart about how you play with her and what you do. And, yeah. She could be tough. But the disruption effect, and if you are smart and have a good deck built around her, I think she's really cool. Even Patriot, I think, is cool with Debris, but I don't think that's how you should be building Patriot, in my honest opinion. But I like her. Destroyer. Destroyer's really fallen off. Is he the very bottom of A tier? Because we're approaching a lot more cards. It's looking like a B is all like, but I think this is correct. B is going to have the most cards, and then hopefully, you want it to be like a bell curve, right? You want B to be the thickest, and then go from A to S plus as like a nice bell curve. Same thing on C and D, where it goes more on C, less on D. That's how you have a good balanced game. Unless you have like something like Arrow just dominating the meta. But is he the bottom of A? Destroyer decks are pretty much non-existent for the most part. You might occasionally see them on the ladder, but they aren't as good as they used to be. Now, Atuma is nice in the deck, I think, because you already have things like armor, and it kind of gives another option to something like Warpath if you don't draw him, which is an improvement. The only thing is, 15 power isn't super insane in a single lane if you're typically playing Destroyer by himself. You might be playing Destroyer on Cosmo to, get 18 power there. But I think Destroyer has a chance to come back. I think that deck just might need a little bit of a retool in how it's approached. I think maybe Sunspot should be played in the deck. Maybe not, because you do curve out pretty consistently with that deck. You're not floating mana very often. I'm going to put Destroyer... I do think Destroyer is better than most of these cards here in B. It is extremely narrow in what deck it goes into, but I do like the card. I think it's good enough to merit its spot in A, even though the deck hasn't shown much. We're talking about the card itself, not just the deck. And I think all it takes is something, or some minds to kind of look at Destroyer and like give a nice, good, fresh take on it, or even some small adjustments to make the deck more viable. So I'm comfortable with A. It's just a lot of power, and you can probably get away with it. Dr. Doom, I'm gonna say, is an S tier, because I think he's better than all these cards here in A. I think Dr. Doom's very good. Very good, especially with the Sandman ramp deck that's going around a lot now, which I already thought that the Sandman ramp Electra ramp style decks were in a good position prior to the Sandman buff, but even more so now, Dr. Doom's shining in a nice way. So, and he can also function in a plethora of different decks. He can be his own thing in like control decks. You can play him in a on reveal kind of Wong deck with like Odin. You can play him in the Electro ramp kind of deck. He does have a lot more flexibility. He's just a solid grade 6 drop overall. So S tier I think is appropriate. Doc Ock. C. Top of C. Better than Crossbones. That's for sure. The randomness of it can be really funny, but it's super inconsistent. It's very RNG heavy. It does take a lot of knowledge of what your opponent could have in hand, but most of the time you're not playing him that way, and even then it's not super viable and it's going to change your playstyle of Doc Ock very much. So you're usually just kind of saying YOLO and hope you flood that board and flood that location and kind of are able to win it from there. But I don't think he's particularly great. He's just a fun card, and he's fine. Let's see. Dracula, A tier. Now, you could argue that Dracula is narrow in the sense that it can only go in discard decks, but that's not true at all. We saw for a little bit, for a few weeks, and you might still see it very occasionally on the ladder. I know I ran into it literally today, is that Zoocula deck that runs like Khazar, Zero, like Sunspot, like Iceman, things like that. And then on the top end runs your runs an Infinite and like Chavez and has Dracula to be able to kind of pivot into and also She-Hulk to kind of pivot into this, like, okay, we're gonna buff the board with Khazar and like Zoo, and then have Dracula as like a surprise, like drop 20 on you, that kind of thing. And I think Dracula is a very good card. And I think more decks of that type of style can definitely pop up. Dracula can have some fun play around him. And, of course, is a staple in discard decks, but can function in decks on its own and kind of be somewhat built around him. Have like a little like Dracula package thrown into a deck. I think that's a great design choice for deck construction. So Dracula, yeah, A tier. Drax, C tier, but I think better than Doc Ock. It's just fine. It's a 4/5. At least it's not the worst rate ever. And then jumps to a 4/8, I believe is what it is, right? But he's not very good. So C tier. I don't think it's worse than a lot of these. It's more consistent than Crossbones. It's less risky than Doc Ock, and I think it's pretty good. S tier, Electro's up there. You see it in Galactus, see it in Ramp. Probably better than Doctor Doom by a hair. Electro is like, yeah, Galactus, Ramp, Electro decks are very big, both in play and in play style. So yeah, Electro is deservedly there. And then you can do fun shenanigans. Like, of course, you can destroy it with like destroy effects. You could even like cheat out a destroyer early and destroy the Electro and that kind of thing, which is always kind of funny. You can Viper it, give it to your opponent, which I think is really, really funny. I don't know if that's the best play, but it could be. But yeah, Electro S tier. Falcon, worse than Beast, better than Drax. Like, you probably play Falcon and Beast in the kind of the same deck, though I have seen people say that the redundancy is a bit too weird and you kind of just want to stick with one or the other. I think Falcon's worse than Beast, because specifically you have to deal with 1-drops. But I think it's still fine. But it's also super narrow where it's played. But I think the functionality of a Falcon deck in and of itself is better than what Drax can do and like what all these other C cards can do. So yeah, I'm going to say that. I really don't think there's that many D tier cards. There shouldn't be. But Gambit, towards the top, B. Of course, there's the Wong Mystique Gambit combo, and that's very powerful, which is probably why I'd put it, especially in Mr. Negative decks. That's probably why I have him in B. Otherwise, he doesn't see that much play, even in discard decks. He's kind of like that fringe, like maybe you play him, maybe you don't. He's usually one of the first cuts if you have a card that you're more inclined to want to play. So purely because of how powerful that combo is, that's why he's in B. But otherwise, he probably would be in C. Ghost Rider, bottom of B. Really goes in Holodex. It's a good solid card. I love the idea of having like packages where it's like Lady Sith, Death, Ghost Rider just randomly in a deck kind of thing. I'm not saying that's good. I'm saying like that kind of idea of building a deck in that way, to have these packages thrown in. I'm a big fan of, and I think Ghost Rider has potential similarly to how Dracula can have that, though I think Dracula's is far more consistent and easy to pull off. So yeah, Ghost Rider is cool. Probably bottom of B. Don't think it's quite as bad as anything in C. Giganto. Probably B for big. Towards the top of B. Say it's about there. A lot of people just don't expect it. Underrated card is definitely what I would say. It's very underrated. Usually people only think of Giganto being played in Hela decks and Lockjaw decks. Not Thanos Lockjaw, but traditional like Thor Lockjaw kind of thing with like Wasp and stuff. But Giganto is, honestly, I kind of like him in control decks too, like the lane shutdown stuff, because usually people don't expect it. And 14 power is a lot, especially if you're playing some other stuff on the left lane, like even if it's just like a Sunspot armor, and then you go in like Storm right lane, play Jessica Jones, and then like, or even you have like a Daredevil, you know, Professor X setup in another lane, and then you can Giganto left. That can win you games. And Giganto is a very good card for what it does. It's pretty much a vanilla card, but you know, 614, nothing to scoff at. Goose, also a B card. Also a B card. Probably, it's very narrow where it goes. Maybe not super narrow, but it's not as narrow as like discard decks or Cerebro decks, but also it definitely goes in Cerebro too. Things like that. So yeah, I like Goose. I like the ability to just kind of like, especially when you have cards that reduce the cost. Like for example, if you have Zabu in your deck and you want to have your 4 cost be 3, then you can play it on a Goose location. I like that a lot. Goose is really nice in that sense, being able to have some kind of lane control, and solid card, really solid card. Goblin is a A tier card. Is he better than Destroyer? Yeah, I think so. I think Destroyer is probably the bottom of A at the moment. Goblin's really good. Mostly control decks, but you can also just kind of shove them in if you have the curve for it and it makes sense for your deck, where you just want to get a nice, you know, 3-point swing, right? Yeah, Goblin's just solid. There's not much to say about him. Just very solid. Hazmat. Towards the bottom of B. I don't think it's bad enough to be in C. The deck isn't super viable, but I think the deck is very fun. And it really goes in one specific deck, is like a Hazmat Wong kind of thing. Now, there is the Toxic Sarah deck floating around. Marvel Snap Zone, KM Best. You know, great content there. So maybe the stock of Hazmat will rise a little bit more. But bottom of B, I think, is appropriate based on where it's played, what kind of decks it's in. But it is a powerful effect when it goes off. Hela. I'm gonna put Hela at the top of C. That might be controversial. I think Hela decks are incredibly, just way too much RNG, way too much gambling, and for the most part, Hela decks kind of fall apart if you don't have your plan, especially if you're going with the Invisible Woman, you know, random 3 cost discard a thing, 4 cost discard a thing, MODOK, and then Hela, or like, you know, like just something like that. Like even if it's just MODOK Hela in a lane on top of Invisible Woman. If that falls apart in any way, shape, or form, or you discard Hela early, or it gets discarded, or something where it's disrupted, you get leeched. They put a Cosmo in front of the Invisible Woman. They Enchantress the Invisible Woman. There's just so much going against Hela, and it's so telegraphed, especially if you're playing the Black Cat variant, which most of the time Black Cat does show up in Hela decks. And they see that Black Cat just get discarded randomly on their screen on turn 1 or 2. They know you're a Hela deck now, because that's pretty much where Black Cat's played. It's just too much against it. Too much working against it. Helicarrier. Towards the bottom of C. It's probably better than those cards. It's not very good. The discard thing is a little weird. You gotta have like a again, that's like, I like the idea of exploring a package with Ghost Rider, like Lady Sif and Helicarrier being your only 6-drop. I think that's very interesting. But you need a lot of stuff to come together to even be able to pull that off. Honestly, the only reason it's even where it is in C is because it is at the very least a 6/10 you could just drop down, which is, you know, it's bigger than America Chavez, so that's not horrible for what a 6-drop does. So, yeah. Hellcow. Oh, didn't mean to grab Human Torch. That was a whoopsie daisy. Hellcow. Gonna be in B tier. Probably around. We're gonna put all these guys together, I think. So yeah, Hellcow, pretty integral to discard decks. Now, there are some decks that have. Excuse me. There are some decks that have cut Hellcow with like Modoc's introduction, things like that, to kind of find the room and the space, but I still think Hellcow is a place in all the discard decks. That's where it goes. It's just solid. Good rate. It's one of the plethora of 4/6s, which are all good in my opinion. And Hellcow is no different, especially for what it does in the deck that it goes in. So yeah, B tier. Human Torch. So it's interesting. I have Dagger in D, but Human Torch I'm going to put above Adam Warlock. Human Torch is better than Dagger because it can get bigger a bit easier, I think, based on my limited experience when playing Move and watching Move. But as I said, Move is not very good, so he's not going to be that great himself in terms of where he is in the tier list. Invisible Woman, around the bottom of B tier. Good setup card. Problem is it's usually pretty telegraphed on what you're doing. People are usually going to throw a Cosmo in front of it. Now, if you're playing the ongoing one with, what's it called? Where's he at? Blah, 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 blah. Omega Red. If you're doing that kind of thing, then, you know, you can probably catch people off guard in that way. But it's still pretty telegraphed. People are going to be, it's usually like a Patriot thing hidden in there, that kind of stuff. People did that for a while. Just put like Patriot, Mystique, and then Ultron. So it's fine. Jane Foster Thor. Probably, is that too high? She really only goes in like a Lockjaw deck for the most part. Like you're playing her with Thor, and Thor Lockjaw is where she goes. And Thor Lockjaw isn't super great at the moment. But I do think she's better than these other cards because she at the end of the day she is a 5/8. That's consistent, where all these other cards have some stuff going against them where there's not extreme consistency to them. So I think that's appropriate. I think she's just at least she's a 5/8 and then does a thing in the decks that she goes in. Can be very good in those Lockjaw decks to get Wasp back from getting played, or like, you know, Thor's Hammer, Mjolnir. So yeah, I think that's appropriate. Juggernaut. A tier. Slept on card. Very, very good card. It is just so great to play it over like on turn 4 with a Storm's location. Juggernaut's fantastic. Definitely should play it. Very good card. It does kind of go in those lockdown lanes, but it also can go in like it can go in like Cerebro 3 if you want to do that. It can be played in just control decks in general. It could also be played just as a good curve kind of thing, and like something you want to hold on to like turn 6 if you want to go like some, even like before when we played like Sarah silver decks, Juggernaut was one of the best cards in the deck, I feel, to be able to clear that lane on turn 6, and I still think it serves that purpose. So I think Juggernaut's very good card. Kingpin, probably better than Helicarrier, but not very good. There are no decks that really play Kingpin. It's a meme kind of thing. You can do like the Arrow, Magneto stuff, whatever, and it's a 3/4. I am actually just talking myself out of his placement. D tier. D tier. He telegraphs big time what he does, and there's some ways to play around him. You can drop a Cosmo on his lane to make sure that they can't do any move shenanigans over to that lane on turn 6. So yeah, I think Kingpin's pretty bad. Leader is also a bad card now. Top of C tier though, at least it's a 6/7, and it can have some playability to it, but they massacred my boy. And I don't even like Leader, so I don't really care too much. I think he was a nice necessary thing for these turn 6 hand dumps, and they could have just changed it to if your opponent plays 2 or more cards instead of just 1, then you copy them. I think that would have been fine. But regardless, he's been nerfed to oblivion. Not very good. Lockjaw, top of A tier, I feel. There are just so many decks that want to use him. Discard Lockjaw, Thanos Lockjaw, just the Thor Lockjaw. Those are all very competitive decks, Thanos being the best one as of late, of course, but the other two have had their moments in the sun at previous metas in the last couple months and are really good in their own right, and I think you can still climb with them pretty effectively. And Lockjaw is an enabler for all of that. And he is RNG heavy, don't get me wrong, but he's a very, 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 very good card. Not quite S tier, but I think Lockjaw just has so much potential as new cards come out and will only get better with time to be able to do more things with them. And I think the Thanos Lockjaw is the best iteration of Lockjaw we've seen. The thing I like about Thanos Lockjaw is the fact that it's not dependent on him as a card, and you can still win without him, but he's just good. Just a good card. I know the RNG is going to turn some people off to it and think that I'm putting him too high in top of A, but I think he's that good. I think he's that good for competitive decks, and we've seen Lockjaw feature, our Lockjaw feature decks be towards the top of the meta over the life of Snap so many times, and I don't think it's a coincidence. So, Luke Cage, he's going to go right next to Hazmat. Little buddy. Luke Cage is cool. Played in Cerebro decks like Cerebro 2 and definitely Cerebro 3 as well, to be able to like counteract the negative effects of ongoing locations, or not ongoing, but like, you know, reduction locations, things like that. He of course goes in a Hazmat deck, and I think he can find some more room. I think he can find some room in other decks as time goes on. He might need a little buff. I think maybe make him a 2/2, which would be really nice for Cerebro 3 decks to make him a 2/2. Or Cerebro 2 decks, I apologize. But bottom of B. I think it's fine. Magic is an S tier card. Magic is a very good card. Completely changes the way the game is played. Shifts the dynamic on its head. Can really catch people off guard because she's not played super often, and but when she is, she's very impactful, and you can theoretically play her in any deck, and that change of giving us a turn 7 can really mess people up, and as the controller, you're always in the advantage. She got nerfed back in beta for a reason, to change to you can only be on turn 6 or only play on turn 5. She got changed to not be able to be played on turn 6, obviously, so, but still a very good card. Magneto, I think it's an S tier. Just the fact that it moves stuff around, it can dictate the board state a little bit. It's a 6/12, very powerful, can go in Lockjaw decks, get paired nicely with that, and the fact that it can have some other pairings that just be good in control decks, Lockjaw decks, big stuff decks like Electro Ramp, has a lot of playability in those, and has a lot of, you know, it's nice to be able to look at your opponent's board, be like, okay, here are the 3 and 4 drops they have. Let me see where I'm going to pull them. Yeah, Magneto's very good. I think definitely an S tier. Maria Hill, towards the top of C tier, probably better than Leader. if I'm being honest. Don't think Leader's very good, but Leader's definitely better than Hela. You can play her in Dino. I don't think she's super necessary. Gives a random 1 cost. Her rate's fine as a 2/3. You probably want to play her more things like in like Kazoo decks, that kind of thing. But yeah, I think she's just, at least you know what you're getting. It's going to be a 1-drop. Her rate's fine. She's early in the game, so even if you get something like an Ebony Maw, then you can still at least play him if you're playing her on turn 2. So I like her. I think she's perfectly fine. Not B tier. She's not even close to Coulson, but I think she's certainly better than Leader and Hela and a lot of these other cards because she's very consistent in what she does. You know what you're getting out of her, rather than some, like, her ceiling isn't high in any way, but her floor is definitely bigger than a lot of these other ones, I would say. Maximus, A tier. Very good. Just great in like 0 decks in general. It was really good in the Surfer decks. I think you can still play a Surfer deck at this point, to be honest, and it could be fine in that as well. You can still do that. Maximus is just a great card. If you want to even play Ronin decks, that kind of thing, still good. It's a 3/7, and giving your opponent 2 cards isn't the end of the world most of the time. And of course, you can 0 it and then make sure that they don't draw the cards anyway. So Maximus just has one of the best rates in the game, possibly the best rate in the game. So Miles Morales, Spider-Man, top of C. Top of C. Move decks, again, aren't very good, but this is one of the best ones there are because at least it, you know, interacts with different move stuff. Like, you know, Arrow if you're going to play it earlier, Magneto if you cheat it earlier, that kind of thing. Bifrost, stuff like that. So it's, you know, it's cool. And even things like Polaris and stuff like that, which we'll get to. So Miles Morales definitely is one of the better move cards because it's not inherently tied to move on its own, if that makes sense. It can kind of interact with the board a bit better. But yeah, Mr. Negative is an S tier card. It's a scary card. It's the bane of existence for the design space in Marvel Snap, and is always going to be a very good card. It's always going to be a deck that will show up at the beginning of new metas because it's when people are trying to explore new things with like nerfs, buffs, new cards, etc. Mr. Negative is a very consistent thing, and you know what you're going to do, and you're just going to kind of try and get it going, and it can function without Mr. Negative. Funnily enough, it's definitely better when you hit Mr. Negative, but with the additions of like Darkhawk and stuff like that, it's a very good deck. It is a little too RNG, I think, to be one of the best decks, like on like Tyros and stuff like that. But because of the impact that Mr. Negative has on the design space and his overall ability and what he does for the deck he goes in, even though it's very much a singular deck, it's so game breaking in what he does that he has to be an S tier. Mojo is an A tier card. I think better than Green Goblin, Juggernaut, stuff like that. I would say another underrated card. Great in Kazoo decks. Great in just stuff that's going to fill the board. I would even like playing him in like, I think Thanos even could use him as a card if you're not going the destroy route and that kind of thing. And he's pretty good, especially when you fill up a location, which you often do with like a Lockjaw lane or even just a stone lane in general. And Mojo can really help with that extra 6 power because usually players might try to contest that as well. So yeah, Mojo's really good, very solid card. Can go in a lot of decks, but very much going to be going in a go wide kind of style deck. But those aren't super hard to design or come by in Marvel Snap. And there's a plethora of ways you can build them. And he is able to stand on his own in that way. Moon Knight, C tier. It does discard a card. Yeah, I think C tier. So Moon Knight is not bad. I don't think it's as good as the other discard cards. Gambit again has that combo, and I think more often than not you'll see Moon Knight in a deck over Gambit for the at least the discard decks themselves. But Moon Knight, because he's just going to discard your opponent's hand one card and also your own, which can help you, of course, in discard decks. It's not as impactful, and honestly, the rate for other stuff like Lady Sif and Swordmaster I think are better, and that little disruption isn't as good as what these other cards do. Calling Wind, is much better for Swarm. Hellcow discarding 2 cards, better rate, and yeah, so Moon Knight's fine. Will be played in discard decks, even over Gambit, but Gambit has that combo we talked about with Wong, Mystique, Gambit, especially in negative decks, that is just so obnoxious and powerful when you get it, that I think that puts him above Moon Knight. Mysterio is another B tier card. It's fine. Not nearly as good. Mysterio is another B tier card. It's fine. It's a card that's, fell off a little bit. It still sees some play here and there, but ever since its nerf, and especially the lack of Sarah decks for the most part, Mysterio isn't as pulverizing. I think it has a decent, interesting home in, Patriot decks. Even Destroy decks for the most part have dropped Mysterio, which is where he was played predominantly. But I think he's still a decent card overall, and all it takes is the right circumstance to have him find a bit more spots in the meta. But I still see him often enough in laddering and in different decks to be able to say he's fine for what he does. Little mind games, that kind of thing, and can be played in more decks than it seems. But he does thrive in pretty much 2 decks, being Destroy and Patriot more so. Mystique is an S tier card. Copying other ongoing abilities is insane. Pairs with Patriot, pairs with Cerebro, pairs with Iron Man, pairs with Darkhawk, with Devil Dino. It is such a good card and is a staple in all the decks that play the aforementioned cards I just went through. Great card. Definitely one you want to target in a token shop. Very good. And of course, we'll only get better as we get more ongoing abilities with the at the play and the ceiling that we have for the ones we have released so far. Nick Fury by middle of C tier. Meme card. 5/7 is a decent rate. Adds random 6 cost cards, so it kind of makes your curve kind of set up, which is kind of nice. But the agents aren't very good overall. Agent Coulson is still the best by a mile. And Nick Fury is just, it's fine. But I don't think it's bad enough to be D. I think it's better than these other ones. So yeah. Omega Red. Top of C. There's a combo with him, but that's really it. And it's hard to really build around him. You're not going to slot him in a lot of different decks. And he's a good card in the sense that you can catch people off guard. But it's the 4 power is not usually good enough. You need to do some stuff with like wave, onslaught, stuff like that to really make use of them. And like Invisible Woman too. So that's maybe a bit too much setup. So C tier he goes. Patriot. Around the bottom of S tier. It just makes its own deck. And Patriot decks have been good pretty much the entire time Snap has been around. And Patriot decks are one of the decks that will always have a place in the meta. And when your namesake card, even though it's only being played in one deck, just like Mr. Negative, when it's that consistent and that just straightforward and like just solid, it has to be an S tier based on that merit. Polaris is an A tier card. I would say, whoopsies. Where'd she go? Right here. Polaris, I would say above Mojo. 3/5 is really good rate. Not as good as Maximus, of course. But if your opponent's playing Sunspot Armor, which a lot of decks are, Sunspot's the most played card in ranks 80 to 100. And I think the most played card in the game in general across all ranks right now. And being able to yoink him to a lane where he can be, Killmongered, Shang-Chi even in the late game, or like even Elektra if you're playing that, is already valuable enough but being a 3/5 and just solid in general, and being able to kind of maneuver the opponent's 1 and 2 cost cards in some way, shape, or form is impactful, and it's just a solid card. Psylocke, around the bottom of A tier. It's just an enabler. It's just a solid enabler. You're going to see it in a lot of decks that want to like cheat 4 cost into play. Mr. Negative, for example, being one. Wong is another one. And Psylocke is just a great enabler for that, and that's not going to change. And I think she deserves to be an A just for that, because she is a staple for those kind of decks. So you don't have very many cards that do this. And her and Zabu are a nice pairing, and the redundant Zabu, I would argue, is better and will be above her. I'll actually put her at the bottom. I think Destroyer is a little bit better, but I think she's good enough for that. Quake, D tier. I think better than Black Bolt. Honestly, I don't think Quake's that bad, but not good enough. Needs a power adjustment. Needs something. Maybe just make it so it doesn't have to be played in the middle lane. I know that takes some flexibility from you as the player to be like, oh, I don't need it to switch these things around, so I'm going to play her on right or left to make sure that that doesn't happen. But I don't know. I like the ability. I think the ability is actually pretty underrated for what it is. Still one of the worst cards in the game, even with that being said. But yeah, she needs some kind of love. But I don't think she's awful. Quinjet, towards the top of A tier. Very good card. Can be played in bounce decks, Thanos decks, Devil Dinosaur decks. Anything that creates randomness to your hand, or things that aren't from your opening deck in general. Quinjet's amazing. And being able to play a bunch of 1-cost cards for nothing is really nice. I think Quinjet's phenomenal. Very good card. Will always just get better as time goes on, because we're going to get more of these cards that add random cards to our hands or decks. And Quinjet's great. Quinjet is great. Red Skull. It's another A tier card. Probably around here. Right next to Artemisol is flavorful. Shuri. Very good card. Shuri makes Red Skull great. Being 30 power is very good. Being able to Taskmaster it. So yeah, Red Skull is fantastic. And it can also even disrupt like things like Cerebro decks, which isn't, super common to see, but it's worth noting. And yeah, being able to zero it even just for a 5/15, the rate is insane. Even with the buff it gives your opponent, can oftentimes win that lane. So Red Skull's good. Rescue, underrated card, I think, but probably around here. Middle of B, not incredible, but being able to go like Professor X on her is usually a way to win that lane. So that's already nice. She can theoretically go in kind of any deck. You just need to play something on top of her the next turn. And a 4/9 is a really good rate in that sense. So yeah, I think she's fine. I think she's perfectly reasonable. I think she is not a C tier card by any means. She's B. And yeah. Rockslide's another B tier card. Honestly, I would put her in, or put him in just above Rescue because of Darkhawk. And Darkhawk's very, very good. Very great card still, even with the nerf down to a 4/0. And Rockslide has a nice rate, being a 4/6, similar to Hellcow, similar to White Queen, and would be a staple in any Darkhawk deck, and even in a lot of decks like Devil Dino that are also playing Darkhawk in addition to Devil Dino to kind of pivot either way. Rockslide's cool. I like the card a lot. I think it's underrated. I thought it was underrated even before Darkhawk came out for the disruption alone, and I think its rate alone being a 4/6 is enough to get it in B, to be honest, just because of that. Rogue is an A tier card towards the bottom of A, I think. I do think Psylocke's better. But Rogue has a place in the meta. You want to be able to steal things. She primarily sees play in like Mr. Negative decks for that purpose, to kind of steal ongoing stuff. But she is less than Enchantress, though the issue is if there's multiple ones in that lane, like if it's a Patriot and a Mystique in the same lane, she's only going to yoink one of them, where Enchantress would grab both of them, not to steal for yourself, but disable them. So that's the trade-off here. But I think she's still a pretty good card, and I think the ability to do what she does and steal things and be disruptive in that way are good enough to make it to A tier, even though she doesn't see as much play. Ronan is probably the very top of C tier. I think the Sandman buff hurt Ronan decks. I think you lost out on your very good curve. And again, Ronan decks were not played much at all. But at least when that deck kind of existed, you could go Sandman on 4, Ronan on 5, something on 6. And now you can't really do that. You can just save Ronan for turn 6, but then I like to be able to go on 6 playing like something like what was it, Maximus, to make them draw more cards to buff my Ronan. So you lose that a little bit too. So yeah, top of C. I think that Sandman buff actually was a nerf to that deck, but I think it's much easier to build around Ronan than it is a lot of these other cards. Sarah, S tier card. Probably right there. Still a very, very good card. Really, really great. And will only get better as we go on in time. That's just one of those cards. So there's so many different flavors of Sarah. You can play Sarah in Patriot. You can play Sarah in just like a classic Sarah 2 deck with like, you know, what's it called? Mysterio, and even Hitmonkeys around the corner. Hitmonkeys around the corner for April. It was leaked on the data mine. It is the April season pass. Hitmonkey's really, really good in Sarah decks, so she's just going to get better. Very good card. Anything that reduces cost in this game is very good. She-Hulk, top of S tier. I think she's better than Death. She pairs extremely well with Arrow, and yeah, just insane. Very good card, especially now that she's Series 3. That's just bonkers to me. She can go in literally any deck, especially in like the Deathwave deck, of course, but just float on 5 and then go She-Hulk Arrow. That alone can win you a lot of games. Spider-Man, towards the top of B tier. Would have been A tier if Zabu was still as good as he is, but he's not. So, but Spider-Man's still solid. Lockdown locations, that kind of thing, and still think it's fine. Not super incredible, but can theoretically be played in any deck. Works better when you have a thing around him or some kind of build around him, or at least something that fits that game style of locking down locations. But otherwise, I mean, he's just a perfectly acceptable card. Taskmaster is up here in A tier. Can go on a lot of decks, destroy decks primarily. It can go in Bayro. It can go in like Deadpool focused decks. It can, of course, is going to be played in Shuri Zero decks. Very, 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 very good card. Has to be played with other stuff, but when you double a Red Skull on a 30 power and then you go Taskmaster, that's really good. Hood, top of B. You know, actually, no, Hood's an A card. Right between Mojo and Polaris, yeah. Hood's phenomenal. Be able to make that demon, and there's a lot of decks that can make use of Hood. Obviously, destroy decks, getting rid of that. Don't have to worry about the -2. I like playing him in Valkyrie decks too, to kind of catch you off guard, make him a 3 later in the game. Can be played in bounce decks with Beast and Falcon, where you can just pick up the Hood, keep replaying them, and then just not play the Hood again after you have 2 or 3, demons, which is also really nice. So Hood is really good. Just a very good card. Thor is going to be probably the very top of B. I don't think it's quite good enough to be A. I think you have that little consistency issue of like you have to draw Mjolnir. That's when he's good. Lockjaw makes him better, but again, he wants to be played in Lockjaw decks, and that's primarily where you will see Thor, and then he wants to be played alongside Jane Foster. So yeah, I think that's perfectly appropriate. Titania is an A tier card. Right there. Very good card. Great with 0. I know a lot of people are like, you gotta play her with like big brains or whatever. But no, you don't. Just hold her very late in the game and play her late in the game. Or just 0 her on 2 and like just go like 0-1 her on 2, or just something else like another 1-drop if you have it in that deck, like a Sunspot if you're playing that, and then just go 0 her on 2, something like that. Very good. I think she's really good for the rate. Typhoid Mary, around B. Probably a bit lower than that though. Probably around there. Yeah, I think she's better than all these other cards. But you really want to play her with like Luke Cage or 0. But she's also kind of lost her spot in a lot of 0 decks, to be honest. She's been getting cut. So, yeah. That's why she kind of comes down the ranks a little bit for me. Ultron, towards the top of A. Very good in Patriot decks. When you go Patriot, Mystique, and you have like Blue Marvel even out there as well. So if you go like, even if your game is literally just this, Invisible Woman, Patriot, Mystique, Blue Marvel, and then Ultron, or something like that. Even if the single lane is just Patriot, Mystique, Blue Marvel, and Ultron, and just one lane and then fill everything else, that can win you games. And when that's the case, it's a good card. So it's only played in one deck, Patriot. Yes, you can play it in Dazzler decks, but don't think it's very good. Yeah. Venom B. Let's put him next to Spidey. I think that's appropriate. I think he's not as good as Goose in terms of lane disruption. I think he's better than Spidey and these other ones. One of the most weird mid-ish cards in Destroy decks. But you can also do 0 decks with him too. I like that style of it, where it's less so on the Red Skull Taskmaster thing. You still play that in there, but you do like a lot more like Parasites with Titania, because then you can play Titania then Venom, and before he triggers her to go on the other side, he's already eaten her, so you don't have to worry about that. And then you can do the Artem Zola thing of just sending through their 2 lanes. I think he's really cool, has some flexibility in a lot of different decks, but he's usually the card that is the one that's cut primarily in Destroy decks. So for me, that's why he's in B tier. Viper, C tier. Probably better than Ronin. Yeah, just being able to give them a hood, give them a sentry if you're doing that kind of stuff. That's cool. But that's really it. You can do some cute things with like Borrow of No Name and give them a big card. But at least she's consistent in what she does, and I like her for that. Wasp. A. Just an A card. It's really weird that Wasp is as good as she is. Plays a Patriot. Can play with like, Cerebro 3. Be able to bast it. Play like that. Just the extra little point of damage, even like in like lockdown games or like stuff like that. Obviously, Lockjaw decks like the player. So yeah. S tier. Wave. It's appropriate that we have Wave, Death, She-Hulk up there. Wave is insane. Probably needs to get reworked to make it so that when she changes things to cost 4, they only cost 4. Because otherwise, this whole Bayro thing with Death, She-Hulk, Wave, Arrow, it's a little bit too much. So, yeah, probably needs to get changed. But for now, really good. Wong. A tier. A tier. Probably towards the top. I'd say better than Ultron, not as good as Dracula. Makes its own decks. Very good for that. Really fun. Strong with like things like Black Panther and Artem Zola. You can also play with like a Hazmat Luke Cage deck. You can just do the traditional classic thing of Wong, White Tiger, Odin, and that can be enough to win games. It's truly still a powerful thing to do. So, yeah, Wong, A tier. I don't think he's quite S tier because I think he's dropped off a little bit in terms of playability. Now, do not let that, knock off what you think of him. He's still an amazing card. I think the impact of a lot of these other cards in the S tier are a bit more than Wong. Yellow Jacket around the bottom of C tier. I like him in Cerebro too. That's really it. Yeah, very bottom. And last but not least, Zero. Probably the very top, maybe the very bottom of... Yeah, let's do that. There you go. Zero has his own deck, and it's a strong deck, and it's a great rate being a 1/3. So there's our list. So we have Arrow in her own zone by herself. She's S+, best card in the game, not even close. And then we have a bunch of other stuff in S tier, A tier, B tier, C tier, of course. And then the worst cards in the game being Dagger, Kingpin, Quake, Black Bolt, Black Cat, Agatha, and Crystal. So tell me, what do you think? Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Where would you kind of change some spots on the list? And if you are not Series 3 complete and you're looking at someone in the token shop, let me know who you're targeting. What are you excited to get? What of these cards are you most happy to have pulled early on in your Pool 3 journey? But of course, if you can, like and subscribe. It helps the channel, all that kind of good stuff. It takes a couple seconds for you, but it means a huge difference for me, and I appreciate you guys a lot for the support. And I hope you listen to me next time. So, see you.